हम सबको पता है कि हमारी एजुकेशन, खासतौर पर पब्लिक सेक्टर एजुकेशन पाकिस्तान में is resource constrained. Accountability is very important, but accountability के साथ साथ support is also very important. At this point in time, somebody said, well, women are not exactly like smaller men, so we need to have a specific test crash dummy for that, is for women. Well, McKinsey this summer, they had a report that said generative AI will add between, let's say, $2.6 and $4.4 trillion annually to the global economy. That's a massive amount of money. AI and the End of the Human Race, that was published in the Tribune.
Why we don't see many women in STEM और engineering की क्लास में जो हम एक देख रहे होते हैं कि कोने में कुछ चंद लड़कियां बैठी हुई हैं.
That saying that, takes a village to raise a child, I saw it play out.
I had not thought of that, and I had actually not thought of boys doing that,
Yes.
The mindset is there.
Mindset is
I am
there.
the mindset.
पहली बात है कि you're right, it is everywhere. Domestic abuse, domestic violence is pervasive. We just don't need stories of victims. We need stories of survivors.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Amna Dilawar and welcome to another episode of True Essence. Today we have Dr. Farah with us. Dr. Farah is an assistant professor at SOE LUMS. She has done her doctorate from University of Washington in computer science and electrical engineering. She has also worked as a monitoring and evaluation lead for the School Education Department of Punjab. She is also currently serving as a consultant with Education Global Practice with the World Bank. Welcome to the show, Dr. Farah.
Thank you so much, Amna. Very happy to be here.
How have you been doing?
Good.
So, आज की podcast जो है, I actually wanted it to be focused on AI specifically, but I think हम in general सारी चीज़ों के ऊपर ही बात करेंगे. जहाँ जहाँ conversation गई, we'll just keep it a very organic one. So सबसे पहले just walk us through how you got there. आप assistant professor and LUMS में how did you do your doctorate, schooling कहाँ से वगैरह वगैरह.
So that is a wonderful place to start. I had a fairly ordinary stint up till undergrad. I did my undergraduate from NUST in telecommunication engineering. After that, my story sort of becomes more interesting. So at that point, I did a little bit of work. It was in the development sector with education in Punjab. But after a very short time, I got married. I have a son, that's a very big part of my identity. But the marriage, unfortunately, ended up in a domestic abuse situation. I was very fortunate that I was able to extricate myself from there. And when I did that, I had at that point a toddler, and I needed to figure out how to financially support myself. And being that I have always loved studying, I actually ended up going back to graduate school. I did my master's from FOST also in engineering. And then in that time, I was fortunate enough to have a friend who was going for Fulbright. And she asked me to apply. And I said, no, I don't think I will get it. But she insisted. And she was very insistent, very persuasive. And I did apply. And I ended up getting the Fulbright PhD scholarship. So my son and I in 2015 left for the US. He started kindergarten. I started my PhD. 2020, I graduated. We moved back to Pakistan. At that point, instead of working in the academia, I ended up working for the public sector, which was quite a departure. So as you said, I worked for the monitoring evaluation team within the School Education Department of Punjab. That happened right after I came back to Pakistan. And then from there, I moved on to UNICEF Education in Pakistan and worked there for about a year and a half, and then switched to consulting with the World Bank with their global team in education. And by this time, my shift from engineering to education was essentially complete. I am much more focused on data in education, but education has now become my home. And this fall, I was fortunate enough to become a part of the School of Education at LUMS, which is a phenomenal, vibrant community. So that's sort of an overview of how I got here.
Right. It's a phenomenal journey, I have to say. Or I get to see very few women who are actually in STEM. Or like you also talked about the marriage that failed. उस पे भी थोड़ी सी बात करेंगे. But generally मुझे बताइए कि how is the transition from the whole engineering background to this education is going for you, और क्या क्या चीज़ें आप देख रही, what are the opportunities जो आपने मतलब बहुत सारी चीज़ें you might have come across in education जहाँ पे आप अपनी वो वाली सारी advanced research जो आपने की है उसको use कर सकती हैं. So what are some of the opportunities in education that you're seeing?
So that is a very interesting question as well. So just a little bit. जब एक STEM classroom में आप जाते हैं, so I was in engineering classroom as a student. Fast में मैंने पढ़ाया भी. तो the trend you see is, there are a large number of men sitting in the class, and then you have a small group of women sitting in a corner somewhere. And it's not that women cannot contribute to engineering. Women are wonderful engineers. They bring diversity to your engineering teams, but they don't have a lot of access, especially when it comes to engineering, certain technology
Right.
fields. And that is something that always bothered me. I know from my own journey that, I was able to get out of that marriage, और मुझे जो privilege हासिल था वो मेरी undergraduate education का था. और building on that, I was able to make a life for myself and my son. And that is something that I want all women to have, right? Right to a good education, even a technical education, STEM education, higher education is a privilege for a lot of people. It should not be. So when I started my PhD, I also started doing some advocacy work for, access to STEM careers for women, for underrepresented groups. And that advocacy actually shaped my PhD dissertation. So I ended up working on machine learning tools that can help flag some of the biases in teaching learning materials in STEM specifically that may disadvantage, let's say, English language learners. Yeah, they may disadvantage women. So that is where I saw the opportunity of using machine learning to support equity in STEM, right? So that's slightly different to a normal narrative. Hey, machine learning introduces biases. Of course it does. But machine learning tools can also be used to
remove
flag,
bias.
yes, flag and remove
exactly.
biases. So that was the area of my work. When I came to Pakistan, my work was not less machine learning, but more quant focused. So Punjab Education Department का जो data है, there are close to 11 million students in the system. Their information is there. आपके 50 साल के करीब स्कूल हैं, उनकी information है. And there is a lot of detailed data set available, right? So my focus really was, and I started thinking about, well, इस data को हम actionable evidence में कैसे convert करें? Right? So that all of my background working in machine learning, working in engineering came into play here. Okay, this is a very good example where, that synthesis of data into evidence can support learners. It can support effective allocation, utilization of resources. And that is the first time really where I started thinking about education systems and how, skill sets that come from other areas can benefit education. And I have always been very passionate about education. So I just needed the slight push to just make my way firmly into education, which I did. And the good thing about that happened after Punjab was working with UNICEF. मुझे मौका मिला पंजाब से बाहर काम करने का. So KP के साथ मैंने थोड़ा सा काम किया. गिलगित बल्तिस्तान के systems मैंने थोड़े से देखे education के, public sector education in particular. And that's when you get to realize कि yes, there is a lot of work that we can do. हम सबको पता है कि हमारी education, खासकर public sector education पाकिस्तान में is resource constrained, right? We just don't have enough resources to really serve our most vulnerable children to the way they should be served. But what we do have, using very thoughtful, evidence-informed policies, we can do a good job or a better job of supporting them.
But do you have stats to support the what came out of that work? Like कुछ ऐसा जो आप कह सकें कि tangible हमारे पास कोई outcome है उस सारी research का, या फिर you think that it's in a very nascent stage at this point कि अभी उतना mature नहीं हुआ. हाँ, the work is there, the idea of doing it is there, and the motivation is there, but it's like a work in progress.
So ये बिल्कुल work in progress है. जो अच्छी बात ये है कि we have the framework. हमारे पास data systems हैं, very decent data systems in public sector education. In Punjab, I know KPI work with also, I can say the same thing. The data systems are there. Now, they are now being used as well, right? So this is it's a very positive shift that I see. पंजाब में जब एनुअल डेवलपमेंट प्लानिंग होती है तो जो स्कूल एजुकेशन डिपार्टमेंट है दे बेस दिस प्लानिंग ऑन द डेटा दैट दे हैव यस दे आर नॉट डूइंग वेरी एडवांस्ड analysis of this data, but they are using this data to allocate resources.
And also accountability is also there, I think. क्योंकि the I also actually happen to take a look at that data. और उसके अंदर वो मैं देख सकती थी कि अच्छा दिस स्कूल इज़ डूइंग वेल एंड दिस इज़ नॉट, इसके इतने बच्चे पास आउट हो रहे हैं और इसके अंदर ये जो भी कुछ चीज़ें थी, आई डोंट एग्जैक्टली रिमेंबर कि डैशबोर्ड पे क्या क्या था, बट व्हाट आई कुड रियली सी कि इससे ना अकाउंटेबिलिटी बड़ी अच्छी आ रही है. तो so I think that is also one big thing that is out there कि वो भी बड़ी ज़रूरी थी कि अच्छा हमने resources तो लगाए हुए हैं बट हम उसको देख ही उससे रहे कि अच्छा अकाउंटेबिलिटी कैसी हो रही है उसकी.
So accountability, I think, is very loaded, particularly in the context of Punjab that I'm aware of. Yes, accountability is very important, but accountability के साथ साथ support is also very important. हमारे educators, education managers, they need support as well. So I think the data that we have can serve both functions. So yes, hold people accountable, what is happening, but then also recognize areas where people need more support that can also be synthesized from the information that we have.
Exactly. ठीक है. अच्छा, थोड़ा सा आपने STEM एजुकेशन और एजुकेशन फॉर वुमेन की ख़ास तौर पे बात की. आई वुड वांट टू hover over that a little. मुझे ये बताइए कि अपने एक्सपीरियंस से कि how hard was it for you to get that जो आपको Fulbright मिला, और like you said, were you like an average student या फिर कैसी थी आप? बहुत अच्छी थी, बहुत थीटा बच्चा जो होता है वो वाली थी, या फिर is it something that is open for all?
So academically, I was good. My benchmarks, जो आपका GPA होता है, percentages से, they were very good. और उसकी वजह, I think you would say कि I was one of theta बच्चास. लेकिन हुआ ये कि around the age of 15 or so ना मुझे I had this realization. If I can do a test well, I will score well, right? I had this realization कि it may not be as much as about my knowledge as it is about the way I attempt a test. And that is something I took with me all through undergrad, and I was able to score decently well in undergrad. In terms of Fulbright, though, I will say that it is fairly accessible. They don't just look at, because I've also been involved in their reviewing processes, the thing is that they look at the holistic picture. They look at a person as a whole and their drive or their motivation to be in the program, their ability or their potential to contribute to Pakistan, but also share things about the Pakistani culture with the US. So it's more holistic, and they very much encourage women. Their goal is to have at least 50% women be a part of the program, which I think is very important because women generally have less access to graduate studies abroad than men do in this country for a multitude of reasons. Like, that program actually is trying to equalize some of that.
Right. और लाइक आपसे जैसे आपने कहा कि इट इज़ डाइवर्सिटी को वो लाइक दे कीपिंग इट दैट इन चेक. तो हाउ मेनी वुमेन अपने ही उस टाइम में आपने कितना देखा कि पाकिस्तान से कितने ज़्यादा लोग, आप एक तो आप अपनी फ्रेंड ही बता रही थी कि साथ आपके गई हुई थी, बट वर देयर मोर पीपल पाकिस्तान से इन स्पेसिफिकली इन दीज इंजीनियरिंग डिग्रीज जैसे आप कर रही थी?
So not so many women. Not so many women in engineering, and that's going to the US. I realized it's not just a Pakistan phenomenon.
Right. I was going to ask क्योंकि अभी आपने थोड़ी देर पहले like you had mentioned this कि आपका जो whole जो research है आपकी PhD की, it is actually based on this.
Yeah.
कि इसमें bias आपने remove करना है. तो I was going to ask, is this like worldwide या फिर ये सिर्फ पाकिस्तान के अंदर है कि we see कि we don't see this diversity?
So engineering historically has been sort of dominated by people who have a certain amount of privilege. Now, the privilege comes from gender, it comes from, your racial ethnic background. In the US as well, women generally tend to be fairly underrepresented, right? As do people who are from racial ethnic minorities. So I'll tell you an interesting fact. We have had test crash dummies for quite a number of years, right? And that's how they test the safety of cars. 2023 is the first year that they have made a test crash dummy model on the physique of a woman. At this point in time, somebody said, well, women are not exactly like smaller men, so we need to have a specific test crash dummy for that, is for women. So that sort of gets at the problem of when diverse groups are not represented in the engineering design process, you end up with certain problems. And this example, I think, is illustrative of the fact that historically, these fields have not catered to diverse audiences.
Okay. थोड़ा सा AI के ऊपर बात करते हैं. We see this bubble of Gen AI these days. I know that some people think that it's just another thing like जैसे अभी थोड़ा सा पहले NFTs के ऊपर बात हो रही थी और this could be just a bubble जो with the time it will live its age. और कुछ लोग कह रहे हैं कि it's like a whole another horizon of which is I think I see it as that क्योंकि LLMs we have not seen them being so powerful इससे पहले. But what do you think about what's your whole take about the age of Gen AI? कि has it lived it या फिर आप इसके अंदर मजीद क्या देखती हैं?
This is again a very interesting question. 2020 में जब मैंने अपनी PhD complete की, part of my work was training language models. अच्छा उस वक्त even 2020 के end में भी there was a specific niche audience जिसको पता था कि language models क्या चीज़ है. Not everybody knew about it. Now you fast forward to this point in time, a lot of people now know what a large language model is, courtesy of ChatGPT that has come up. And it's become very pervasive, right? That tells you, and the sort of conclusion that I draw really from that is the fact that it is a horizon, right? And there's been more work on this. For example, McKinsey this summer, they had a report that said generative AI will add between, let's say, $2.6 and $4.4 trillion annually to the global economy. That's a massive amount of money. So my sense is that, this is something that will change the way we do things. And it will change the way we do things, not just in engineering, but across multiple disciplines.
And what has the impact that you have seen so far in education? Like आप बच्चों को पढ़ा रही हैं. What do you observe over there?
So एक बहुत overwhelming concern ये थी कि अब ChatGPT आ गया है, तो then students are just going to rely on it and essentially stop thinking for themselves. And I think this is a valid concern, right? But I think, and from the literature in the space that I'm seeing come up, we need to think of this as a shift in the way we teach and assess. Right? So ChatGPT or generative AI as a whole is a tool that our students should be proficient in using. And our job as educators is to figure out a way to teach and assess, which lets them build proficiency in using this tool, while also themselves being very engaged with their own learning and having agency of their own learning. So right now, this is an exciting time for educators. We get to witness this shift, but we also need to work at providing the best scaffolding for us.
Yeah, I think overall it's just that see this as an opportunity, not as a threat, because अगर हम इस चीज़ को मुझे पर्सनली ये लगता है कि अगर हम regulations और इस चीज़ में पड़ गए तो the people who are going to use it for a damage or for something, for like we refer to it as the end of human race, the people who want to end the human race would actually किसी ने अगर इससे क्रिमिनोलॉजी की तरफ लाइक क्राइम का कुछ करना है तो दे विल कंटिन्यू एडवांसिंग इन देम और रेगुलेशंस हम सारी अच्छी चीज़ों के ऊपर करेंगे बिकॉज ऑब्वियसली समवन इज गोइंग टू यूज इट फॉर डीप फेक्स और समथिंग लाइक दैट इज नॉट गोइंग टू स्टॉप. बट हाँ, इसको एज एन अपॉर्चुनिटी देखना है. अपॉर्चुनिटी के ऊपर ही बात करते हैं कि देयर इज दिस गैप दैट आई सी इन बेसिक अंडरस्टैंडिंग. अगर आप किसी से जैसे हम लोग हैं और I was just talking to my father. तो उन्होंने कहीं पे AI का नाम सुना and then he came के TV के ऊपर कोई होस्ट था जिसने एक रिपोर्ट की थी and that was like a bot, or he was like, it's just going to take all the jobs, or ye dekho ye koi AI, like he was referring to it as a thing, or I think wo usko kuch, the general understanding was not there that what AI is. He was like, एक AI आया था इस तरह से करके कुछ. So what do you think कि इस तरह के लोगों के अंदर वो वाली अंडरस्टैंडिंग कैसे बिल्ड की जाए कि जहाँ पे एक 12 साल का बच्चा और एक मे बी 60 इयर्स का वो बंदा जो इससे इतना कनेक्टेड नहीं है इस चीज़ से, they can actually see कि what it is and what its potential is.
So this is the time of the need, basically. And I think this is the time, अब ये conversation हो रही है across the world, कि for everybody, we need to build basic, understanding of AI, basic competencies around AI. खासतौर पे in the K-12 space, ये जो हमारे स्कूल में इस वक्त बच्चे हैं, they need to understand कि AI actually होता क्या है. So technical people understand कि जी ये model है, उसको आप data देंगे. This is essentially what a loss function looks like. This model will be trained to minimize the loss function, and ये इसकी limitations, and this is what it can do, this is what it cannot do. For everybody else who doesn't have this knowledge right now, this is a very intriguing black box. And that also leads to certain assumptions, that leads to the headline that you were talking about, AI and the end of the human race, that was published in the Tribune. And I think this is where we really need to step up, right? I think our critical, unfortunately or fortunately, the critical job of this is going to fall on the education system. UNESCO is doing some work on that. Very recently, they've published an AI curriculum for K-12, or essentially curriculum guidelines, not a curriculum itself. And this is where we need to start talking to our educators about bringing this content into the classroom, demystifying what AI is, making sure कि even somebody who's in 5th grade or 6th grade, उसको समझ आए कि ये model क्या कर सकता है, क्या नहीं कर सकता. So we have a set of people who are not mystified or horrified, but we have a set of people who are informed consumers, right? So that's where we need to be. Now, getting there is a challenge, right? Our education system is struggling with certain things even now. So getting to that point where we are able to build those competencies is going to be a challenge. Again, this is an opportunity for us to, start thinking about it, for building those competencies, figuring out how to support our educators, and then how they will then support our learners.
I think इसके ऊपर ना मैंने देखा है कि जो developing nations हैं, it's easier for someone who's not, उन्होंने इतने ज़्यादा अपने आप को एक चीज़ के ऊपर, हम अभी एक टेक्नोलॉजी के ऊपर सेट नहीं हुए हैं, हमारे सिस्टम्स इतने ज़्यादा बेस नहीं है. एक डेवलप्ड कंट्री को ज़्यादा टाइम लगता है शिफ्ट होने में देन टू अ डेवलपिंग नेशन, जहाँ पे अभी चीज़ें इतनी they're more prone to adapt to things quicker. तो this is just a study कि वहाँ पे जहाँ पे कोई निज़ाम बहुत पुख्ता नहीं है या कोई बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग फाउंडेशन नहीं है, वहाँ पे ऑब्वियसली कोई नई चीज़ आएगी तो लोग उसको ज़्यादा जल्दी अडॉप्ट करेंगे, वैसे कि वो वाली जगह जहाँ पे कोई चीज़ इन प्रैक्टिस है फॉर सो मैनी ईयर्स. लेकिन पाकिस्तान, why is it so that अभी एक there was a kid 3-year-old in 3rd grade, not 3-year-old, 3rd grade में था, और I could see कि उसके कंप्यूटर की बुक के अंदर कुछ बिता, एंड he actually had to draw एक्सेल के एक पेज का स्क्रीनशॉट जो उसकी बुक में था. उसको होमवर्क ये मिला हुआ है कि इसको तुमने ड्रॉ करना है, और वो ऊपर से उसके जो टैब्स हैं होम, और he was writing that the kid was literally using scale to make a rectangle, और फिर वो ऊपर होम और वो सारा कुछ लिख रहा है, और he had no idea what that is. I mean, he must have seen it somewhere, कंप्यूटर लैब में अपनी या कहीं पर भी. तो अगर हम अपने आप को एक तरफ, सो मैं ये पंजाब बोर्ड की बात कर रही हूँ जिसमें कंप्यूटर की बुक है, आप बात करें K-12 की, सो इवन कि ये चीज़ अगर K-12 के करिकुलम में आ जाती है, पाकिस्तान के अंदर पंजाब बोर्ड में जो हमने एक मैथ्स लेवल के ऊपर अगर कोई चीज़ लेके आनी, तो वो तो हमारे यहीं पर है ना, मतलब वो तो पंजाब टेक्स्ट बुक बोर्ड में है. हम अगर यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं कि हमारा 3rd ग्रेड का या 4th ग्रेड का बच्चा वर्ड या एक्सेल को ड्रॉ कर रहा है कॉपी के ऊपर, तो फिर हाउ डू यू सी अस ट्रांजिशनिंग टू दैट कि हमारे बच्चों को मॉडल ट्रेन करना आ जाए या उसको बेसिकली डेटा पॉइंट्स का पता चल जाए या कुछ भी ऐसा?
So I think your question touches on a lot of pain points. Um, I think let's start with here with the fact कि जब आप स्कूलों में STEM पढ़ाते हैं, साइंस पढ़ाते हैं, मैथ्स पढ़ाते हैं, you talk a little bit about technology. क्या आपका educator, does your teacher, are they comfortable and proficient in these subjects? The answer to that for most part, खासतौर पे अगर आप middle school, high school की बात करें, तो then most teachers are not empowered to actually teach the subjects. And then you see things like, well, let's like Excel sheet को draw करते हैं as opposed to using Excel to achieve something. So that speaks to a larger problem of sort of the gaps that we have in education across the board. And that is where I said that ये आसान काम नहीं होगा. So moving from, this notion of acquiring content knowledge without linking it to application is pervasive across our system. We need to move to a space where we, acquire knowledge and understand its application. And is there an easy answer to that? No, there is right now no easy answer to that. And it'll take a lot of effort on the part of a lot of people along this chain. You're looking at leadership, you're looking at managers, you're looking at educators, you're also looking at the community that the students come from, right? Shift वहाँ से आएगा, right? कि तालीम आप अगर हासिल कर रहे हैं, उस तालीम का मकसद क्या है? It is not, is it just to acquire content knowledge, or is it to figure out what is the application of this knowledge, right? Where can this knowledge be beneficial? How does it support your agency? How does it support what you do in your community, in your lives, in your jobs? And that, I think, is a much, much bigger question. But there is recognition, right? There is recognition of the fact that learning poverty is a key issue when it comes to education in Pakistan. इसके ऊपर काफ़ी सारी reports हैं, Asar highlights this, the annual state of education report in Pakistan does it. And that is where we know there's recognition that we need to do something. And while we're doing something about it, let's also bring in the technologies that people now need to learn. So like I said, both a challenge and an opportunity for us.
Okay, so have you seen, since you have been close with the education department और आपने थोड़ा सा काम भी किया, are people over there open for this change, और या फिर वो देखते हैं shortcomings curriculum के अंदर, उनको at least they are aware of that, and are they actively working to remove it, या फिर कुछ मतलब hands on या practical learning या इस तरह की चीज़ों की तरफ do they see themselves going there? I mean, ठीक है, lack of resourcing and everything is there. But then again, bombarding the student with something that is of no value is also, should just not be there. मतलब अगर आप कुछ काम का नहीं पढ़ा रहे हैं, मुझे नहीं लगता कि कुछ भी पढ़ाना ज़रूरी है. फिर कुछ भी ना पढ़ाओ अगर I mean, if it's not useful, if it's not practical, जिसकी कहीं पर कोई application नहीं हो पा रही, तो I would just say कि it should not be there. आपने resources भी लगाए हुए हैं उस चीज़ पे, but आप उसको उस तरह से कर भी नहीं रहे जिस तरह से उसको करने का हक है. तो वो I would rather not do it at all. But do you see कि लोग वहाँ पे तैयार हैं इन conversations के लिए, curriculum को revisit करने के लिए, और वो वाले उन resources पे बात करने के लिए which are required for us to get there?
So there are people who recognize, that we need to change. And there are, people at multiple levels who have this recognition कि हाँ, अब हमें कुछ चीज़ों को change करने की ज़रूरत है, update करने की ज़रूरत है. And you will also see that there are specific, let's say, schools, there are certain head teachers, principals who are doing wonderful work. And that is the thing that gives me the most hope is कि इस सारे scenario के अंदर, given what they have to work with, given the resource constraints, there are some teachers, there are some principals, there are some schools in the public sector who are doing wonderful work. And the fact is कि right now maybe it's driven a little bit more by individuals. और जो बात आप कर रही हैं वो शायद सिस्टम लेवल चेंज की बात है कि हाँ, हमारा सिस्टम ही कंड्यूसिव हो जाए to support learning, to support applied learning, and in the truest sense, develop critical thinking. And I think that is the shift we need to see. And do we have critical mass yet for that? My answer to that is probably not. Hopefully, we're going towards that. I'd like to think that we're going towards that. But yes, I haven't seen enough individuals who are talking about this where I am hopeful.
अच्छा, मुझे थोड़ा-सा अब हम बात करते हैं टुवर्ड्स पॉलिसी और कुछ कुछ इस तरह के चेंजेस व्हिच वी नीड टू मेक ऑन अ गवर्नमेंटल लेवल टू इनेबल थिंग्स। वहाँ पे कितनी फ्लेक्सिबिलिटी आपको नज़र आती है कि अगर हम डेटा ड्रिवन डिसीजन मेकिंग करनी शुरू कर दें, या फिर हमारे पास डेटा, क्योंकि आई नो कि जनरेट हो रहा है, हमारे पास सारी चीज़ें मौजूद हैं, बट आर वी पुटिंग देम टू द राइट यूज़? अभी जो मे बी बहुत सारे जो हमारे सारे पब्लिक सेक्टर्स है, जो सारे डिपार्टमेंट्स हैं, मे बी जुडिशरी इज प्रोड्यूसिंग देयर डेटा, पुलिस सेक्टर अपना कर रहा है, हॉस्पिटल्स का डेटा है, स्कूल्स का डेटा है, आर वी यूजिंग दैट टू इट्स पोटेंशियल? व्हाट डू यू सी देयर?
So इस वक्त जो ओनस है ना पब्लिक सेक्टर डेटा का, that is on the public sector. One of the key challenges that I've seen is the fact कि डेटा को अगर आपने पब्लिक सेक्टर डेटा को, which is individual data, it might be your data, might be my data, उसको अगर आपने इस्तेमाल करना है to train, let's say, machine learning models, train predictive models or identify trends, तो you need to, work on it. And इस वक्त उसकी जो custodian है, they are government departments and they have only so much capacity to work with that data. Now, to make that process more efficient, or, to bring in people who can actually do analysis, we need to have really clear guidelines around, how can you take this data that is being generated by the public sector, and how can you share parts of this data with academics or researchers or people who are working in the private sector in a way that is beneficial to the public sector systems, but also takes care of these notions of confidentiality, of doing no harm. So, for example, in the US, you have FERPA. FERPA is regulation around educational data, right? So you cannot disclose educational data, certain aspects of it. Similarly, for medical records, you have HEPA, that is regulation that is there, that is meant to protect individuals. If we have regulations and frameworks in place, okay, this is how we're going to protect confidential data, this is how we're going to ensure no harm is done, then that opens up the space where you can take this data, share it with academics, researchers, even private organizations, and then they can create models, they can do predictive analyses that can then support the public sector, right? So that's where, as Pakistan is working towards the national AI policy, this is where, having these regulations, these not regulations per se, but having guidelines, right, to both support individuals' data, your data, my data, and then also enabling the use of that data for public good. I think this is where if we take the right steps, we can actually get a lot more done than we have the capacity to do right now.
Excellent answer. I was really क्योंकि हमने खुद ही रेगुलेट नहीं किया हुआ इस चीज़ को अभी. अब आई सी के कैवियाट्स जो सारे हैं और थोड़ी सी जो एक फ्रिक्शन है बिटवीन these governmental bodies sharing their data. It's actually because we as individuals are just not I think responsible enough कि this should be open. लेकिन डेटा, अगर आपने ओपन डेटा देखा हो, ओपन डेटा पोर्टल लम्स ने एक बनाया था, they I think such portals are also very important. It doesn't necessarily have to be the data that's coming from the public sector. So वो वाली तो एक चीज़ है, but I think overall बहुत सारी रिसर्चेज ऐसी हैं जिनके ऊपर कुछ डेटा जनरेट हुआ है. और मुझे वैसे पर्सनली इट्स नॉट along the sides of policy making etc, but I think इस तरह के इनिशिएटिव्स भी होने चाहिए जहाँ पे लोकल डेटा हमें मिल सके, क्योंकि मुझे लगता है लोकल डेटा की बहुत शदीद कमी है. हर चीज़ के ऊपर लोकल डेटा, किसी ने भी कोई भी रिसर्च किया एंड देव कलेक्टेड द डेटा, आई थिंक देयर शुड बी वन हब वेयर दैट डेटा इज़ अवेलेबल. अगर आप अपना डेटा सेट पब्लिक करना चाह रहे हो, आई मीन, एंड आई थिंक पीपल शुड, क्योंकि अभी हमारे जो LLMs हैं देर एक्चुअली यूज़ तो पाकिस्तान में करने शुरू कर दिए, बट देर एक्चुअली नॉट फाइन ट्यून्ड, या फिर कुछ भी लोकल कॉन्टेक्स्ट के अंदर कुछ भी नहीं है वहाँ पे. I really think there's a need for our data to be there, to be on the internet, ताकि हमारे models उस पे भी train हुए हो, और हम जो भी research कर रहे हैं थोड़ी सी what is your take on the localization of these language models? When do you see कि पाकिस्तान के किसी भी मसले के ऊपर मैं किसी LLM से आम prompt करूं और मुझे कोई local answer मिल जाए?
So I think you touched on a very big challenge. And this is generally for the global south. आपका जितना data produce हो रहा है global north में, this far surpasses what's happening in the global south. And they have public use data as well. They publish their surveys, microdata as well. And आपके models वहाँ पे ज़्यादा train हो रहे हैं. So पाकिस्तान के context में, even if you look at data on local languages, there isn't much. You might be able to find a language model that's been trained on Urdu, लेकिन आपकी जो regional languages हैं उनके ऊपर आपको कि data set मिले, data set that is large enough or nuanced enough कि आप उसके ऊपर language model train करें, that's very very unlikely. So this requires intentional effort. Like there has to be this intentional effort where you start collating data sets for our local context in our regional languages. The issue of linguistic diversity has been coming up in natural language processing. आपकी बहुत सारी ज़बानें हैं दुनिया में which are, let's say, just oral traditions, right? या जिनके speakers बहुत थोड़े हैं उनके ऊपर काम नहीं हो रहा generally, with very few exceptions. And that's also true for some of our, or rather many of our regional languages.
Exactly.
उन पे काम नहीं हो रहा इस space में. यहाँ पे we need to have an intentional effort. And इस research को incentivize करने की ज़रूरत भी है. Right? And this is where, if you talk about policy, अगर आपकी government की तरफ से incentive है, right, to create these data sets, to do this research, that can really move things forward. This is where regulation, instead of, telling you what not to do, can really also help you to actually do things which are beneficial for all of us.
Right. क्योंकि मेरा ख्याल है जब तक commercial need नहीं है किसी भी चीज़ की, nobody's gonna work on it.
Yes.
अच्छा, हम लोगों ने आपकी लाइफ के बारे में भी थोड़ी सी बात की, and we also spoke of why we don't see many women in STEM और engineering की क्लास में जो हम एक देख रहे होते हैं कि कोने में कुछ चंद लड़कियां बैठी हुई हैं. तो आपने कहा कि आपने एक्सपीरियंस किया इन पाकिस्तान और आपने अब्रॉड भी ये देखा कि we see lesser women in STEM. हम लोग थोड़ा सा बात करते हैं जो हमारा वर्किंग इकोसिस्टम है उसकी. We see very less women over there too who are working, या फिर और एक बहुत बड़ा हमारा मसला ये भी है कि most of the women who are really determined वो शादी के बाद काम करना कंटिन्यू नहीं कर पाती. Where do you think कि we need to make changes for to enable that? एक तो mindset shift required है, ठीक है, like पाकिस्तान के अंदर families ही इस चीज़ को accept नहीं कर रही. That is a place where nothing can be done as उस तरह से ऐसा नहीं है कि हम किसी लेवल पे कुछ कर सकते, because that is something which is very personal to each family. लेकिन कौन सी ऐसी चीज़ें हैं जो इनेबल कर सकती हैं, जो एक्चुअली कुछ ऐसे इश्यूज हैं जिनके ऊपर कुछ काम किया जा सकता है, वहाँ पे हमें क्या करने की ज़रूरत है?
So I think being somebody who is a caregiver, ठीक है, you are a primary caregiver, you can have a child जिसका ख्याल रख रहे हैं, you can have parents, you are the primary caregiver. उस सिचुएशन में, let's say, even if you have other enabling factors, your family is okay कि आप काम कर लें, how do you manage the logistics of it? How are you going to make, just logistically, how does it make sense? When I was in the US, my son would go to school and I'd go to work, but my work hours were longer than his. And there was this option where he could access after school care. Right? So it just took that load off of me, where, on site there was after school childcare, he could go there, I could pick him up. The other thing I was very fortunate to have was a very nice community around me, people who supported each other. And it was at that point the University of Washington, a community of single parents, or sorry, rather student parents. Some of them were single parents, some of them were two-parent households. And, we could count on each other to sort of fill in. Let's say we were taking a late class, or, we had a meeting that ran over, somebody else would be there for providing that support. And that that saying that, it takes a village to raise a child, I saw it play out, and it was so wonderfully done, right? There's no hesitancy involved in that. You can rely on people to provide support for you, just like you provide support for them. And I think we need to have that, right? So if you notice, I talked about one setup that was more formal, having after school childcare or having childcare, but one support system that was
Informal
completely
was also
informal,
there,
right?
yes.
So I think if we have that system in place, we can enable people who are caregivers. Now, predominantly, we think about women who have families, who have children, also includes men, right? There are men who maybe less frequently, but they also end up being primary caregivers for, let's say, their parents or for siblings, other people in their families. And if we have that ecosystem, right, then we have a lower chance of losing these people, of not having them be part of our workforce. We need diversity in the workforce, right? We need the perspective that you, let's say, mothers bring, or caregivers bring, fathers bring to the table. So we need both that formal and the informal systems to support us.
फॉर्मल तो पाकिस्तान में कम एग्जिस्ट करता है, इनफॉर्मल भी कम एग्जिस्ट करता है, बट इनफॉर्मल क्यों कम एग्जिस्ट करता है? क्योंकि हम सारे जॉइंट फैमिलीज में रहते हैं. वाई मतलब दैट सपोर्ट इज देयर कि यू लेफ्ट योर चिल्ड्रन एट देयर ग्रैंड पेरेंट्स, वो वाली सपोर्ट इज देयर, बट मुझे ऐसा लगता है कि इस तरह की सपोर्ट मौजूद नहीं है वेयर यू आर सेइंग कि यू पिक अप समबडी एल्सेस चाइल्ड, और अब सब बच्चे सबके साथ में स्कूल में आ रहे हैं. दिस इज बट आई वोंट से कि ये एक ऐसी चीज़ है जिसको भी हम रेगुलेट कर सकते हैं कि इस तरह का कोई
No.
सिस्टम, बट इट जस्ट हैज़ टू बी देयर. किसी खुद ब खुद बनेगी ये. इट्स आल्सो स्टेमिंग फ्रॉम द माइंडसेट. तो उसकी वो वाली भी आपने केयर पाकिस्तान में उस तरह से देखी है, द इनफॉर्मल वन?
No, I mean, I'm fortunate enough that I can rely on my parents if they're around. Okay, so leave my child when he used to be younger. But beyond that, no. It cannot. I've never experienced this in Pakistan that I would have a neighbor or have a friend where I would just feel very comfortable saying, okay, can you pick up my child from school today? And they'd be comfortable calling me and saying, can you pick up my child from school today and keep them for a bit. And I am not exactly, and I really haven't thought about it a lot, why we're like that. I think there can be multiple factors why that's not very common right now. But I mean, if we have that would make life a lot easier.
That was actually when you were telling about the experience that you had in US. बहुत अच्छा फील हो रहा था मुझे, like it was like I'm living a dream. क्योंकि इस तरह की चाइल्ड केयर अगर पाकिस्तान में हो, I think बहुत ज़िंदगी बहुत आसान हो जाएगी. The domestic violence that you spoke of a failed marriage that you got yourself out of, which is like very brave of you. थोड़ा सा उस बारे में बात करते हैं, because I think a lot of women in Pakistan can actually relate to this, and someone who's as capable as you are has also experienced this. So this is not something जो सिर्फ उन लोगों के साथ हो रहा है who are less informed या फिर less privileged या फिर who are coming from a background जहाँ पे encourage किया जाता है ख़वातीन को to actually tolerate this kind of behavior from men. This is everywhere.
That's everywhere.
Your story tells that it's everywhere. आपके ख्याल में what made you come out of that marriage, or what made you take that step to move out?
So पहली बात है कि you're right, it is everywhere. Domestic abuse, domestic violence is pervasive. Most of the time, the victims tend to be women and children, right? In the time that we are talking, across the world, women and children have been killed because of domestic violence. And this problem is that pervasive the world over. And it does not really, belong to a certain set of people or a certain place in the world or a certain ethnicity. It's everywhere. When I was growing up, right, I knew peripherally of women who had failed marriages, but they were always portrayed as victims and somebody to feel sympathy for. But nobody who was portrayed as a survivor. So when, I found myself in this situation where I realized that this is not what a normal relationship looks like, this is very abusive, And I also had a child, so I started realizing this is going to not just have ramifications for me, but also for my son. Even at that point, it was so ingrained in me that if this marriage fails, that I have essentially failed as a human being, and I have no place in society, that I stayed within that. Now, and that thinking really didn't change, but there came a point where I was told this, that if my mother-in-law put up with this set of abuse for 3 decades, then I will also not go anywhere. And I had this realization that one day my son might also say the same thing. And that was essentially rock bottom for me, right? You need to somehow hit rock bottom, and that pushes into action. And then, despite the fact that I thought that I've totally failed at a person, I realized this is not what I want for my child. So more than myself, I was thinking about my child and his future. And that's when I decided to get out of that marriage. Now, again, that sort of women's agency, I didn't have the right to give a divorce. So it was a long, contracted process for me getting out of it. But I was very privileged in the sense that I had that undergraduate education. Because of that, I had at least some confidence in myself that I will be able to do something to become independent, to be financially viable. That gave me that support. And one thing that I also do talk about is my experience to people. It's like I'm doing right now, because I think that we just don't need stories of victims. We need stories of survivors, right? There is life on the other side. And the psychologists will agree. A lot of people in society might not agree that living in an abusive marriage is actually much, much worse for your children than growing up in a much better adjusted, even if it's a single parent household. So I think just that narrative, we need more of that. Even now, right? It's been more than a decade since I got out of my marriage. We need to hear that narrative more. We need to normalize the fact that if things are not working out, staying in that toxic situation should not be your only option. But at the same time, I also recognize, like I said, कि मेरे पास बहुत privilege था. A lot of women do not have this privilege. They have no alternative, right? If their families don't support them, if they don't have financial viability, they are worried about their children, then they really can't do anything about it. I think this is a much larger challenge that our society is grappling with.
And kudos to you for standing up for yourself. I mean, it's never easy. सब बहुत सारे cases में ऐसा होता है कि we're just thinking about maybe the support is just not going to be there. Maybe our parents, the first thing that I think every woman will think before ending a marriage is going back to their parents' house. It's actually never easy. It's never easy, no matter how supportive your parents are. It's never easy to go back to that place. I mean, so it speaks so much about a person, says so much about a person when they break through, like they just break a marriage and they return to that place and they're ready to take a fresh start. So I think I cannot give you enough credit for standing up for yourself. But yes, closing thoughts I really want you to say a few things about how can we encourage more women to take STEM, to do engineering, to study computer science, to actually get better with mathematics and computer science and coding and other fields like AI, machine learning. First of all, I would like to know that is it inherent of women to not go into these fields? Or is it because there are a lot of men and they see that, okay, there's this thought that it's not for women, or तुम्हारी क्लास में 50 लड़के हैं और 3 लड़कियां हैं, and why are you doing this? इस तरह की चीज़ें जो होती हमने फील्ड्स को बना दिया है, like क्योंकि मेरा ख्याल है कुछ तो ये भी है ना कि like we ourselves have made these fields के ये एक किसी specific gender के लिए हैं, लेकिन हमने ये वाले स्टीरियोटाइप जो हमने एक फॉर्म कर दिया, इसको किस तरह से ब्रेक करना है. ऑल्दो आई थिंक काफ़ी हद तक ब्रेक हो भी चुका है. अब कोई भी फील्ड ऐसी रह नहीं गई, बट आई थिंक दैट माइंडसेट इज स्टिल देयर कि दिस इज़ फॉर गर्ल्स एंड दिस इज़ फॉर बॉयज़, एंड बॉयज़ आर शेम्ड फॉर पिकिंग अप मे बी फैशन डिज़ाइनिंग और टेक्सटाइल्स और समथिंग.
Or
nursing, yeah. But that is actually, I had not thought of that, and I had actually not thought of boys doing that,
Yes.
The mindset is
The
there.
mindset is
I am the
there.
mindset. But yeah, what do you think as a as an individual human being, मैंने क्या करना है, मैंने अपनी सोच को किस तरह बदलना है कि मैं कहूँ कि this is not for women and this is not for men and both can be beneficial to one field in the same way.
So सबसे पहले we need to somehow break this ownership of certain set of people over certain careers. Right? Engineering is not predominantly for men. Teaching is not predominantly for women. We need to stop thinking about that. Now, the answer to your question is multifaceted. उसकी वजह ये है कि ये जो फ़र्क आता है, it happens along multiple dimensions, right? बच्चों की perceptions बहुत early develop होती हैं on sort of, their role vis-a-vis careers. There's some research that shows that by the end of primary school and middle school, children have a fair notion of, their sort of where they're supposed to be. One of the things that, we can do, and I encourage everybody to do, is to reach out to children who are, let's say, primary school, middle school, may be a mentor or just be a role model. Go talk to them, about what you do. Especially if it's unconventional, especially if it breaks the mold, especially women who are engineers, who are computer scientists, who are in technology, and then men who have these professions like nursing. And there's a shortage of nursing staff in the country as well. Or, men who are teachers who just, engage with children so that their perception shifts, right? वो एक mindset बनता है, we are exposed to that implicitly, explicitly. We need to change that for the children who we can interact with, right? They can be people in your family, in community, however you interact with them. And that I think is needed. So children need to be able to see themselves in roles that they would otherwise not see. And for ourselves, I think that there's this constant exercise of checking our own biases. And sometimes our biases surprise us. Sometimes it's like, oh, I didn't think that you were in technology.
Exactly.
But, that's coming from me. So that, I also carry these biases. And that's, I think, a lifelong process where we check our own biases.
और बहुत सारे बच्चे जो है ना वो I think they if you ask someone who's like in early years of their education, आप उनसे पूछेंगे, they'd say we want to be a teacher because that's the only profession they've seen.
They have seen, yeah.
They have actually not seen people at work. They have not seen pilots. They have not seen doctors. I mean, some of the children are actually like they're more inclined to be doctors as well क्योंकि ये professions वो अपनी आंखों के सामने देख रहे हैं.
देखते हैं.
There are a few things जो बिल्कुल नहीं वो देख रहे हैं, and that is these professions जिनसे वो daily life के अंदर interact नहीं कर रहे होते. How a civil engineer works, how builders work, how a pilot works, and all of these. तो मेरा ख्याल है कि बहुत ज़्यादा ज़रूरत है कि बच्चों को एक्सपोजर दिया जाए बहुत अर्ली एज के ऊपर इन सारे प्रोफेशंस का भी ताकि they can actually see for themselves what they want to be. Thank you so much for being part of the show, Farah. It was lovely talking to you. I have a lot more to speak to, but I think we're out of time. Any closing thoughts about what you see the future of Pakistan AI को लेकर? Where do you see us going, like in the next, not the next, but with the coming 5 years, these 5 years that we're going to see? How do you see Pakistan के अंदर AI evolve किस तरह हो रहा होगा, और what is the जो भी एक learning curve है, अब उसको आप किस तरह descend होता हुआ देखती हैं? Do you see कि वो बढ़ जाएगा या फिर वो gap को fill करेंगे लोग? Are they learning enough? Are they stepping up to equip themselves with जिस तरह की ज़रूरत है कि AI के ऊपर जो हमारा knowledge lack कर रहा है उसको are the people upskilling themselves for this?
The answer there very much depends on what we decide to do now. It's if we just let one, I'd like to say that we have phenomenal researchers in Pakistan. We have extraordinary research that happens, and it's happening in the academia, it's happening in the industry. That's always heartening. In terms of accessibility, कितने लोगों को access मिलती है? Do people who are not technical experts, do they become proficient in this field? That depends on the decisions we take, right? The decisions that are taken in the domain of education, the domain of research at large. And if we do make this intentional effort where we will try कि अब नई technology आई है, उससे आपका digital divide doesn't become worse, right? We try to take this technology to bridge the divide instead. I think that will determine what happens in the next 5 years.
Thank you so much, Farah, for being part of the show. It was lovely talking to you. I have a lot more to speak to you, but we're out of time. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Engage with True Essence, and we'll be back in another episode. Thank you.